Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Pillar One Advisory Committee meeting. And we have a guest today. Chris Bush is joining us. Maybe she can introduce herself. I'm the chair for the Pillar One Advisory Committee, and I'm also a family child care provider in Howard and the president of the Maryland State Family Child Care Association. I think for this time, I'd like to introduce the guest, and then we can go with my co-chair and Gina and Linda. Chris, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much, Ruby. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Christina Push, Executive Director of the Maryland State Child Care Association. And we partner and a good friend of the Maryland State Family Child Care Association as well, and work together. We represent over 5,000 child care providers working in the state of Maryland that are licensed. Some are preschools, non-public schools, centers, and a few family child care providers and some Head Start. So we're excited to participate and have provided lots of comments and sat in on many AIB meetings. So I appreciate the opportunity to learn and discuss today. Thanks.
Okay, Rania?
Is it evening yet? Good afternoon, almost evening, everyone. Dr. Rania Miller, Pillar One co-chair.
You're in Charles, right? Charles County?
I am in Charles County, yes.
Okay, welcome. Gina?
Hi, I'm Gina Hoover. I am the early learning lead teacher in Washington County Public Schools.
Linda?
Hi, Linda Gronberg Quinn. I am the department chair for teacher education at the Community College of Baltimore County.
Okay, and then we have Rachel, our AIB staff, and Graham. So welcome, everybody. Do you want me to share the agenda, or how do you want to do this?
Totally up to you. Does everybody have the link? Do you want it on the screen?
Do you want it on the screen?
I printed it.
Oh, you got it printed.
It's up, but everybody else.
I saw a couple head nods that they're good. So maybe we're good.
I don't have it in front of me. A bunch of notes. So I guess in the beginning, we are going to talk about the participation, right? Rania, what's first on the agenda? Participation, right? And then there's some questions.
I was muted. I am pulling it up right now.
And Ruby, I can confirm that, yes, the first topic is the participation strategies as well as access.
Okay, yeah. So, the thing with the participation is we would like to at least see what the participation is like in last year and in 23, right? That would be the end goal. But we also like to put in the discussion why some providers or some private providers choose not to participate. I did talk to some elementary school, and some of them said that they do not have the space currently for the pre-K. So space is an issue. And I live in Columbia, so space is really tight, so I can imagine Baltimore City will be the same because there's no place to put extra classrooms or facilities, even if they have the funding. For family childcare providers, I guess it's difficult for us to participate because sometimes we don't have the student. Like when I did qualify for, I have a bachelor's and I have a Maryland Excels level 5. And I did have an assistant in a separate classroom. However, I didn't have the students. So if you don't have the students, you can't do the pre-K. And sometimes it's even hard for us to do just one student, and you have to do the whole curriculum for just one child. So that's why a lot of the providers also choose not to participate in the pre-K. Chris, I know you have some things to share about child care centers.
Yes, I think I noticed on your agenda that the strategies of serving is really important, I think, as well. And I believe that if you look at this year where there were 2 buckets of pre-K money, the 10,000 from the state, which is the blueprint, and then the pre-K expansion money. So, which will all be, the blueprint, as we implement and roll this out. We had I believe over 90 programs did apply as community-based providers, but less than 30 were able to, access the grants. And there's a lot of reasons for that, some that you touched on, Ruby, and the barriers are obviously, if we don't have enough children in our catchment area, it's not cost effective, for us to do it. And that's why Boston has changed their model somewhat this year, and are doing, instead of per slot, they're doing per classroom for community-based providers. Because in order for us to make it work, we can't pay a teacher commensurate for public school salary if we have only one child participating or two. It has to work. It doesn't work in a business model that way. And then also the certification for the teacher. We're all vying for certified teachers. There's a national teacher shortage, and there certainly is a shortage of teachers in the childcare sector. And with the blueprint also requiring assistant teachers to have a CDA or an AA degree, it pulls from, our well of teachers that are in the childcare sector. And so not only are we losing teachers to public schools in competition, but we're losing them to Amazon and, other much better paying jobs because of, the tuition dependent businesses that aren't bouncing back at the same recovery level in this state or anywhere else, so that we have a critical workforce shortage overall. So I think some of those things and alternative pathways to help our community-based programs find teachers and get them to where they need to be, which is certification, certainly, but we don't have a path to residency. We certainly don't for family childcare. I know that the Office of Child Care Advisory Council, which I co-chair, is working towards changing regulation to allow family child care providers to participate in the non-public school sector. Right now, they're not even allowed to participate as a family child care provider, so they couldn't even work around the blueprint at this time. So, I think that we have some work to do in order to get, as you said, there's space constraints. We want to serve more families. I know this new administration has talked about moving this forward even more quickly, but we need to make sure that we understand how to do it equitably. If you do want to do a 70-30 split, moving to a 50-50, we have thousands of level 3, 4, and 5 childcare community-based programs that meet that quality benchmark for Excels, which is our quality rating improvement system in Maryland. We also have, and I share this data, we also have many providers that have master's and bachelor's degrees. As Ruby said, she has a bachelor's degree. We have many that have master's degrees. What we don't have is many certified teachers in pre-K to third grade. So we need to find a pathway so that we can continue to keep people in this field. And the unintended consequences are that if we continue to close programs, there's less access for families for infants and toddler care and less moms being able to work. This is an economic and an equity issue. So I know that it's important to the AIB, it's important to, families and children, and to getting this alignment right with the blueprint, because we do want it all to work, and we don't want to issue waivers and build buildings for children when we have these great businesses that would like to stay in business but can't do so with that 3 and 4-year-olds.
Yeah, thank you. What about in Washington or Charles or forget anything from the committee that you'd like to share in terms of participation?
I think, from just when we've gone out to, in Washington County, we only have 3 providers that are our community partners, 2 home centers and then a child care center. And so, for us on our end, we're looking at it as, trying to get that split is impossible because there's 35 positions for private providers. And we are universal pre-K here in Washington County. So, we have a pre-K in every elementary school and in 2 high schools here. So, we have a lot of slots available. But on the flip side of that, we have gone and done childcare PDs and different things with providers that are not right now, community partners as far as Blueprint are concerned. But, we've gone and we've talked to them and and a lot of them say, oh, it would change too much of the way that they structure things. Maybe they're more Montessori based, or they're more, things like that. And again, the whole finding a certified teacher is a struggle for, and like you guys said, there's a national teacher shortage. I mean, so it's not just we have vacancies within the public school. I mean, it's everywhere. So I think that that's probably a big struggle for a lot of places, is just finding that certified teacher, to be able to, staff it.
Yeah, which brings us to the next topic, which is the workforce. Let me see. The workforce. Oh, access to centralized pre-K enrollment system. How do we connect families with public and private providers? I know some states are creating like a system where the parents can find providers and enroll, like a system with the pre-K enrollment. And then they could find providers there as well, and then they can choose whatever settings that they would want. What about in Carroll? Do you have issues with participation and stuff? I mean, Charles. Gina, you said you have UPK in Washington County. How are you including the private providers in the UPK?
So our 3 private providers are listed on our application. And all of our enrollment, efforts we let parents know. Rachel had asked if we are universal pre-K for 3-year-olds. We are not in the public school setting at this point. We do not have 3-year-olds. So that's where a lot of our private or our community partners come in, and they, do have 3-year-old slots. So, if a parent calls and says, I really want my 3-year-old to come to pre-K, and we're like, that's when we can say, okay, here's who you can call, that has 3-year-old slots. So, but at this point, that's obviously, this is all new. I mean, last year we did it, but, that's kind of what we've been working on, is just that centralized enrollment and just trying to think, how can we make that best work? Like I said, we, my early learning coordinator and I do go out to our community partners and provide professional development and meet with them often. And then, like I said, we've been trying to reach out to some of the ones that maybe were a little nervous about doing this part of it, the Blueprint part of it, and just, how can we help them, things like that. But, we created an application for our center-based childcare or community partner, and it mirrors our application. So, their application is for their center, and our application is the WCPS public pre-K. But, our enrollment flyers have their information on it and things like that. So we've really tried to get the word out for them as well.
So I know one of the biggest struggle that we have is the grant application process.
Mm-hmm.
How is Washington set up for the grant application process? Do they apply directly to Washington public schools, or do they apply through MSDE? Is this?
That's a good question. I don't want to answer that and be wrong.
Okay.
I believe that they apply straight to MSDE, if I'm not mistaken, but please don't quote me on that, because I'm not 100% sure. Our early learning coordinator deals more with the grant aspect of things. But I believe, if I remember correctly, they apply straight for the grants, just like we would. Because I know, like, for example, last year Head Start was a community partner, and this year they are not, because they did not get the certified teacher in time to be one of our community partners. So that took a chunk of our, well, I mean, they obviously still have Head Start, but we can't call them a community partner as far as Blueprint's concerned.
Yeah, Yeah, go ahead.
I was to say, was your question, maybe I misunderstood it. Were you asking if the grant assistance for writing the grant
Mhm.
for the private providers? Is that what you're asking? I'm just looking at the question on your agenda. The grant application assistance for writing the grants, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, because a lot of the issues is that, it's difficult for the family childcare and some even centers to write the grant,
I
because
think that they did reach out to MSD. I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. I think that they did reach out to MSDE, but with that being said, we have offered our help in, in assisting them with writing the grant application. I can't remember offhand how many, I think all that applied got it with the exception of Head Start because of this, I don't know that we had any that did not receive the Blueprint funding because of, not writing the grant properly, if that makes sense. But yeah, like we can, we can certainly offer assistance to them in the grant writing process, I believe. But
I didn't realize that that the public schools were helping the private providers write the grants. So
I could be wrong. Please don't quote me on that one. I could totally be mistaken on that. I don't want to say something and be totally wrong, but I do think last year, I think that they did go straight to MSDE. I can certainly check on that. And get back to you. But I don't want to tell you for sure and then be wrong.
because the thing that's the difficulty that we're having because of some of the questions they are asking about staff or your teachers, or which we don't have. Most of the time we operate on our own. So that's where it becomes difficult. And for small centers as well, becomes difficult. Linda?
What I was just thinking as you're talking about the idea of problems with staffing, not being able to find enough teachers, it seems like it's sort of the chicken and the egg then at that point, because I know that I can speak for the 2-year colleges, and I know what I've heard from my 4-year partners that we're having problems with enrollment also, of just finding students who want to be teachers, and the ones we have are fabulous and they want to do it and they're very excited about it. And but just finding enough of those folks who want to be teachers in the first place is so difficult.
Yeah.
I think the grant writing is an issue, and MSD, obviously, if they're the ones awarding the grants, they can't provide grant writing because it's a conflict of interest. And so I understand that, but there isn't, I think, I don't know, like I said, if the colleges or if the counties have, some support, small businesses support, that might be something the AIB could recommend. I don't know. I'm just asking as a, guest, but is that something that you've discussed as a team?
That's an AIB question?
Yeah,
Or-
I was just wondering with the committee, is that something that you discussed as a recommendation? I see it in your agenda, but I wasn't sure like where you were with it.
Yeah, I figured like the first half, we can just have discussion, and then the second half, we would have the feedback based on the recommendations and stuff. Jacob is not here, but he had some points that he would like to share. Maybe I'll share it later when we do the feedback part. So I guess the next one, would we have, I don't have the agenda. So we did talk about the workforce shortage and then the non-public nursery, which is another pathway, right? What about in terms of compensation? Because I know one of the goals or the subtask would be to make the providers, give them the financial incentive to participate in the pre-K. I know, Chris, you did tell me that currently it's not financially viable for us because to participate in the pre-K with the amount that they're giving us right now, because that's what we would get in a private pay.
It depends geographically, where you are and what you typically charge for children. But certainly my point is that you have to have enough children based on the per slot to be able to pay a commensurate salary based on what your county is paying their teachers. And then, of course, you want to be able to offer them some type of benefits as well, or you can't compete. So it's difficult to do so, to meet those benchmarks without enough children. And then it doesn't make sense. And that's why I think Boston is looking at, as I said, and I can send your committee that information. So if they're interested to see what they did to, make some adjustments to help the community-based providers to find a way to have a classroom of children, right? Because we can't have a teacher and pay them accordingly to the blueprint if we don't have enough children to do that. You can do that in public school. We can't do it. It's inequitable to call it a mixed delivery system if we can't do it.
Yeah. Now,
Private paying for the public school when there's not enough money to cover all of those things.
So going to the access part, how do we connect the private providers with the families? Currently, there's no system or way, unless if we could be in the listing. I guess MSDE creates a list where the families can choose from the list of providers that are participating in the pre-K. Currently, that's how it's set up, right?
I think the state and the counties can and do it. I believe our Washington County rep mentioned that she lists them, and then I know MSD does as well, but I think county by county, they should be listing them.
Yeah.
All public, wherever there's an opportunity for a family to participate, there should be, all of that should be listed.
Yeah. How do we make the families aware of that this program's available to their children? Is there a way? Do we need to have like a social media outlet or a part of maybe part of a flyer with the CCS, where if the parents are getting a voucher and stuff, then they would know about this other option, like a pre-K programs that are available to them, and the pre-K programs that are available in that area. Maybe that's something that we could recommend.
That might be a question to ask MSDE if they're providing that information about public pre-K to families that are utilizing scholarships, childcare scholarships that are 4-year-olds, or 3-year-olds. That might be a question to ask how that's being done.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else that we miss, Rania, with the?
That second question, the access, just spoke to how we connect families with public and private providers.
Uh-huh.
And I think we did discuss, in our recommendations about the social media. So we knew that. And then the next piece is the workforce.
I think we discussed the workforce, by the way. Jumped in.
I did take notes under the workforce. I put give the providers the financial assistance to participate in universal pre-K. And it's not beneficial if there are no students and if they're unable to provide pay and benefits, and to look at the Boston plan.
Okay. And then the compensation as well, right?
Yep. We can't offer mixed delivery systems without pay.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah. So, we're getting down to the second half of our 528. So do you want to go take a deep dive onto the recommendation with the AIB, or do they have any feedback or questions regarding the recommendations that we shared?
So Ruby, Emma Pellerin from our staff has joined to be able to go through the recommendations and give some feedback. I think are you guys all hearing a little bit of feedback in sound? I don't know what happened. I'm going to go back on mute, but Emma's here to talk with us about the recommendations that were received and how they were processed.
Hi, Emma.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I was also hearing a little bit of feedback. Is the sound better now? It's okay. Okay, great. Thank you for having me here this evening. I'm just going to revisit the recommendations that were provided to the AIB as part of the public testimony and advisory committee input with regards to the draft recommendations. And you may already know some of the things that were incorporated into the plan. So my apologies if these are things that you've already seen. They made it into the final version, but I'd just like to take some time to review that, think about the criteria that was actually used in determining which things to bring into the plan. And then I'll also touch on some things that were brought in as implementation considerations as well, which means we're thinking about what that would look like for potential future changes to the plan if needed, but are not going to be incorporated as a change at this time, but were included as implementation considerations. So as you know, we had a very long period of public testimony and input that was provided on the plan. And as of November 23rd, 444 pieces of testimony, written and oral through feedback forms, were provided to the AIB. And that includes input from our advisory committees as well. And so thank you so much for all the time that you put into providing input on Pillar 1. We really do greatly appreciate your insight, and it's just something that's going to make the plan that much stronger. We particularly appreciated your input regarding dissemination of information for pre-K programs. That was very helpful, and as you'll see, really made its way into the plan. In general, the criteria that we used when thinking about each piece of feedback, and we looked at each document that was presented to us, including what came from the Pillar 1 Advisory Committee, and looked at each piece of feedback individually within each document. So we looked at each recommendation and then thought about it and assessed it in terms of whether or not, in some cases, the recommendation was related to the blueprint or within the blueprint scope when we're thinking about education, because even though this is such a comprehensive bill and plan, there were some things that did fall out of the blueprint scope. And so that was a reason, and I'm not saying that per se about your recommendations, but just generally things that were included in public testimony that were not necessarily related to the blueprint. We also thought about if this requires a legislative change, because the AIB did commit to implementing the plan as written in the law. And we are not making legislative changes this year, but in some cases that might require us to consider a potential legislative change down the road. And some of those things might have been brought in as implementation considerations. But that doesn't mean that it can't be raised later or that action won't be taken later. But this year, it would require a legislative change to incorporate that into the plan, which we could not do this year. And then we also just thought about, finally, and most importantly, will this impact students? How will this positively impact students? That was the biggest consideration for all of our review of the recommended changes. So on that note, I do have your recommendations, and I just have them up on a screen in front of me, and I'll speak to what we incorporated. And I think we were really happy to incorporate quite a few recommendations, the majority, I would say, into the plan, particularly around disseminating information about pre-K availability. So I think it was 1.1.2C. You had recommended use of other outlets to disseminate information about pre-K availability, to include social media, emails, mail, commercials, things like that. And if you look at the plan, I actually have it open in front of me. We have that exact language, although I think that the numbering did change eventually. But in 1.1.1F, subtask 1.1.1F, we have that MSE and LEAs shall disseminate information about available pre-K options to eligible families starting in fiscal year 23. And that includes disseminating information to families in a variety of ways, including in-person and virtual information sessions, informational flyers, emails, and social media. And then also disseminating that information in multiple languages. So that was a big piece of the plan. And the plan also already included from the legislation that local departments of health and social services would contact eligible families that have children who would be eligible for pre-K by September 1st of each year. So that was previously in the plan, but then we expanded to include, the methods of disseminating information to families about the availability of pre-K based on your recommendations. So we greatly appreciate that. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Did you look at the communicate financial benefit
Yes.
1.3C
Yes.
to private providers? Is that part of the disseminating the information?
That was in a separate subtask, but yes, that was incorporated in as well. And I believe, I'm not sure if I have the page number, if I can find it that quickly. There's just so much information here, but that was something that we incorporated into the plan. That is something that we're actually, yes, it's 1.1.3B actually. I did find it. It's on page, let me see if I can find the page number. It's hard to find sometimes. Page 27 of the blueprint. That MSDE will disseminate information on the financial benefits of participating in the mixed delivery system to private providers in multiple languages as well. So that is a requirement for implementation. Some of the other things that we incorporated as well. So some of this was actually already more or less in the blueprint. It just was put maybe in different words, or we did have that incorporated already. For example, there was one recommendation that if a waiver is given to LEAs that has less than the required minimum % of private providers, then private providers will be given priority to provide before and after care services to have at least 30% of pre-K slots in fiscal year 23 and phase up to 50% of pre-K slots in fiscal year 27. And that is the intent of the blueprint, to prioritize that for private providers. So not just that the LEAs will produce a waiver, or the LEAs will receive a waiver, but that all LEAs, but for LEAs to utilize private providers for before and after care services. So that was already the intent of the blueprint. So that was included. And as I said before, there were things, informing families of availability of mixed delivery options. Those things were already in the blueprint, since local departments of health and social services were going to reach out to families to let them know that they may be eligible about those services, but we're just making sure that that information is disseminated in different ways. With regards to transportation to private providers, that is something that is an implementation consideration, since that would require, I believe, additional funding or consideration of additional funding, and that would require legislative change. So that is something that is being considered, but is not changing in the plan right now. And then the recommendation about participating in the LEA employee benefit package, again, that's also something that's a consideration, because requiring that would require a legislative change. But those are all really good considerations, and definitely something that we would like to have continue to go back to. In addition, supporting children with IEPs in private provider settings, that is an implementation consideration, how that will be done, because that is specifically something that is part creating inclusive environments in private and public settings is in the MOUs that are part of task 1.1.5. So that is something that private and public providers are expected to facilitate and support. But just how that's done and how children with IEPs specifically are going to be supported is an implementation consideration, and something that will likely be part of technical assistance, and making sure that students are getting the supports and services that they need based on what's written into their IEPs. And let me see. I did have a question about one of the recommendations, which was partnership between Judy centers, Patty centers, Head Start, and private providers. I was wondering what that means by that partnership, that recommendation. So I did want to ask a little bit more about that, what that would entail and what you were thinking about with regards to that partnership.
Well, I was thinking in terms of like if they have excess students and then if they need additional space.
If they need additional space.
They need additional space, because we could also utilize, for example, Head Start, it's federally funded. So we could also utilize combine, the state and the federal funds and then have a win-win situation and at the same time serve the families and the children. So I was looking in terms of that lens, if we can partner with them, if they have some overflow, they could support the private providers that way. I know in the past, right now in Howard, I believe the Head Start also provide a wraparound care, but I know in the past they didn't provide the wraparound care. So we were doing the wraparound care for them. So maybe that could also be part of the partnership.
Yeah. Those are really good opportunities for partnership and considerations. As part of the blueprint, there is additional funding to create, 30 new PADI or 29 to 30 new PADI centers, I think it might be 29. And then 135 new Judy centers, I think. So I think with that would come funding for available space for the PADI and Judy centers that they may need. But in terms of the, so I'm not sure that would require additional funding, or there would need to be an overlap with Head Start providers because of that. I think that funding should be there for those additional new centers and everything. But in terms of if there's ways to extend or expand services through those partnerships, that could be something to explore in terms of an implementation consideration and what they could be learning even from each other in terms of sharing of best practices and things like that. That's certainly a consideration.
Because I know there's some Judy centers that are sharing their resources with private providers as well.
Oh, great. Yeah, yes, definitely in terms of sharing best practices and ideas and resources. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for explaining that. I appreciate that. So I think that those were the major ones so far. Any questions about what was incorporated or what was not incorporated based off of that information?
What about the number 1.1.1b? Gather data on how counties across the states are addressing the physical space constraints and gather data and statistics on how universal pre-K is implemented in the state and other states.
In the state and other states.
You
have
that information, like what are counties that have implemented the pre-K, how many are participating and which counties are successful in their implementation and stuff. Maybe we can learn from those data.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's actually something we're hoping to, that will be a part of technical assistance in terms of implementing the mixed delivery model and what that will and how that will inform implementation plans moving forward, not just in this year, but in future years with LEAs, that there will be those opportunities to share best practices. And that's actually something that is being facilitated even now with regards to the technical assistance sessions and how LEAs are sharing best practices with each other and what they're hoping to, and what they're planning to put into their implementation plans that will be submitted on March 15th. This is a really good thought.
Could we also kind of survey past providers who opted not to participate and find out what are the reasons for them leaving the program and stuff? I know Chris mentioned somebody who chose not to participate anymore. So it's for whatever reason. So if we know the reason and the feedback, then we could find a solution to improve the implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think that's a really good thought to put together some kind of survey that could be used by all LEAs. If there's a central form or document that could be disseminated to all LEAs that could then be passed on to private providers. If we could have that wide dissemination, that would be incredibly helpful. And working with partner organizations too, not just necessarily through the LEAs, but to get that out there, that could be great to help build and cultivate that understanding for why private providers are no longer participating if they have chosen not to do so.
Yeah. What would that be something that maybe MSDE should consider, because they're the ones who are giving the funding? If they could, at the end of the funding, if they could survey the participants and find out what worked best, what are the challenges, what are things that you should avoid, and
Right.
celebrate success, and then kind
Yeah.
of avoid mistakes. So
Right. Yeah. I think that there's something in one of our implementation considerations, or maybe an actual task in how this is going to be implemented. We do have a point around the pre-K expansion grants in 1.1.1D, where it says that MSDE shall provide technical assistance to providers in completing and submitting their pre-K expansion grant application. So I'm wondering if that could be an opportunity to discuss obstacles or challenges that they are meeting or that they're experiencing. There's also a, okay, hold on. We also have some implementation guidance on the number of private providers who are applying for a grant and then are awarded a grant too. So that could help to identify some pain points in terms of participation in mixed delivery system. So we do ask that MSDE annually identify the number of providers who applied for a pre-K expansion grant and the number that were awarded a grant in its implementation plan. And MSDE should also identify general trends and why providers were denied a pre-K expansion grant. So I know that that's not the same as a survey, because there could be like private providers who have just chosen not to apply, and so they wouldn't be part of that count, and their reasons for not applying would not be identified there. But that is something that we already do have in there that could help to identify some pain points. In terms of the survey and creating that survey and who would actually disseminate that, I think it's a really good idea. I'm just not sure what that process would look like in terms of creating the survey and then who would disseminate it and implement it. So that's a question I think that would need to be considered and planned out and would go into other meetings and conversations. So I'm sorry I can't provide a definitive answer on what that would look like and who would do that now, but I think that's a really good thought and should be pursued.
yeah, thank you. And any other thoughts from the committee in terms of the recommendation? Oh, the other one that we have here is the provide clarity on the process for the sliding fee and how the amount is determined per LEAs. Do we have kind of like guideline for that?
For guidelines for how the sliding scale was implemented or created. So I know that we have the actual recommendations from MSDE. So it sounds like, so that's actually a question that I would have. What would that look like in terms of the guidelines, or what would be helpful in terms of communicating what that looks like out to the general public or to providers or what have you? What would be most helpful with that? I guess what kind of guidelines and clarification do you think would be needed?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, are you asking for, as you look at the increases to the federal poverty level, for families to be eligible? Is that I'm just trying to understand the question. Is that what you mean when you're sending out information to, if a family knows they're eligible as you move from year to year for public pre-K, and then also for the providers of public pre-K, both in public and private settings? Is that what you're saying? Like, as the scale changes and what the criteria is for families to meet?
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering if that information would be helpful to communicate out. Like, is that the type of information you're looking at for? So it's for both families and for providers, like having information that might, be targeted towards different audiences, depending on if you're thinking about, okay, eligibility for, I'm a family and I want to know if I'm eligible versus, okay.
And I'm not on your committee, but it would seem to me that it would be helpful for families and for servicers. So sure.
Yes, definitely. And that would be in addition for families right now, I would just, I'm not saying that wouldn't be helpful to put out or that we can't put that out there, because I think it definitely would be in terms of how the sliding scale actually works. Right now, the local departments of health and social services, though, as I mentioned before, do at least notify the families. So that information is going out in terms of whether or not they're eligible, but just how it works and creating more transparency, since that is something that the AIB is very committed to, making sure that questions are answered, that there is transparency about how all of this works. That's a really good suggestion for putting that information out there in a way that is understandable. And
there's probably families that could participate and if they had more information, and not everyone has a health department, and not every, so I mean, if it's available and targeted in different areas through the LEAs, through MSTE, through the provider community, through public schools, then it's good to have that same talking points, because I think then you'll be able to meet more families where they are and more families' needs, especially as it continues to increase each year.
Definitely. Okay, thank you. That's a very good suggestion. Any other questions or considerations, anything from the recommendations? I know you guys are going to be wrapping up here in a minute, so I don't want to overstay my welcome, but.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like, do you have any other question, Gina, Linda, or Raina?
No, did you include any of the things that were sent to us from, I keep wanting to call him Justice, but from Justin?
Jacob,
yes. I know it's a J. I keep Justin and Justice for some reason, but from Jacob.
So I think that those things from Jacob today, they were sent today. Is that correct? So I think those are definitely, obviously every year we're going to be updating the comprehensive plan. But since the comprehensive plan was published and is now with the printer, unfortunately, we couldn't bring those things into the current version, but those could be things that we incorporate later. So I think that we're going to hold on to those for the updated plan that will be out in August 2023 this year. I mean, man, it's crazy to think that this is already 2023. But yes, thank you for bringing those up. Those were really, I saw those as well, and those were strong suggestions. Some really good ideas.
I'm still writing 2022. It's okay. All the time.
It's gonna take me a while.
So, I mean, thank you. I mean, it looks really good that you're considering taking into consideration a lot of the recommendations and stuff.
Yes.
I mean, that's nice. And then the ones that needs legislative changes, maybe you can work on it at some point, right?
Yes, those are, as the AIB as part of its role in terms of monitoring implementation and progress towards meeting the outcomes and things like that. I mean, with Pillar 5, that section of the plan, you'll see, AIB is going to look at this data, and potentially based off of what the data is showing, what the outcomes are, what the progress monitoring shows us, there's potential for changes to result from that. So I think that that's part of the AIB's charge to think about if there are changes that need to be made that will help us reach the blueprint's overall goals, the expected outcome, all of the outcomes of the pillars, So that's always a consideration. And it will, really be based off of we're implementing the blueprint now, this is what it is. And how is that implementation going? Is it clear that a change does need to be made, and the members will determine, what that looks like, and sometimes that might require legislative change, certainly, but they'll think about those things all throughout the implementation of the blueprint over the next 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
So-
you. Please feel free to ask any more questions or anything like that, or email me or Rachel, and I appreciate the time. So thank you all so much, and I'll let you get back to your important discussion here. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of the evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
So, yeah, I guess our next priority would be to continue the discussion on some of the recommendation, and to also continue the discussion on participation, access, and the workforce, because I think those are the three big areas that would help in the implementation. And I would send out another Google form, Doodle form, to figure out when everyone is available for our next quarterly meeting. So we're done with this quarter, right, Rachel? So the next quarter is in April to June. So I'll send one, and then we have to figure out a day and a time when everybody's available, and when the AIB is available as well soon. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for a wonderful discussion. Rachel, thank you. Graham, for the technical assistance. And our guest, Chris Bush, thank you for coming. Rania, Gina, and Linda, my three colleagues that are supporting the Pillar 1. Thank you so much. And we miss Jacob and Samaya. I know Jacob did have some things he wants to share, but I was not able to get to it. I could share one of the points that he wants to share in terms of space. He said many public high schools have early childhood classrooms built into them for training programs for high schoolers. He said Jacob wonders if this can be transformed into accredited classrooms to help create additional space. Addressing the space. You can see Jacob is coming up with all these good ideas. So I want everybody to put their thinking caps and come up with all these wonderful ideas that we can bring back in April. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We're 3 minutes to the hour, and I'm going to give you back 3 minutes of your time.
And Ruby, thank you. Thank you for your leadership.
Oh, thank you so much, everybody, for all your help. I couldn't do it without you. Okay. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you.